There is a moment in every great story where everything hangs by a thread. For SpaceX, that moment lasted approximately 9 minutes and 31 seconds. The time it took for a single rocket, on its last possible attempt, to either reach orbit or end the company forever. The date was September 28, 2008. The location was Omelek Island, a tiny coral atoll in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, so remote it doesn't appear on most maps. The audience watching the live feed from their computers numbered in the thousands. Most of them expected to watch a failure. They had seen it 3 times already. But one man standing near that launch pad believed differently. He had invested $100 million of his own money into this company. He had watched 3 rockets explode. He had seen his personal fortune nearly wiped out. And he had told his engineers, quietly, without drama, that he would find the money for one more attempt. This is the story of how SpaceX survived, and why it almost didn't. To understand what SpaceX was attempting, you need to understand one fundamental truth about the space industry in 2002. Rockets were not a business. They were a government monopoly. For 50 years, NASA, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and a handful of contractors had controlled every aspect of human spaceflight. The costs were staggering. A single launch on a United Launch Alliance rocket cost between $400 million and $500 million. Not because rockets had to be that expensive, but because the incentive structure rewarded spending, not efficiency. The more contractors spent, the more they earned. Nobody had ever seriously challenged this system, because nobody believed it could be challenged. When Elon Musk announced in 2002 that he was going to build a private rocket company, the aerospace establishment didn't panic. They laughed. Experienced rocket engineers said publicly that a startup could not build a reliable orbital rocket. The physics were too complex, the margins too thin, the consequences of failure too total. One industry veteran put it simply: building rockets is the hardest thing human beings have ever tried to manufacture at scale. So how did a man with no aerospace background, starting from a warehouse, not only build a rocket, but survive 3 catastrophic explosions to eventually transform an entire industry? That is the question this story answers. In October 2002, eBay acquired PayPal for $1.5 billion. Elon Musk, one of PayPal's early investors and its CEO, walked away with approximately $180 million after taxes. He was 31 years old. Most people assumed he would invest carefully, build a portfolio, enjoy the money. Instead, he did something that genuinely alarmed the people closest to him. He decided to spend it on rockets and electric cars. Not as investments, not as vanity projects, because he believed, with the kind of certainty most people reserve for religious conviction, that humanity was on a path to extinction if it remained confined to a single planet. And he believed nobody else was moving fast enough to change that. SpaceX was incorporated on May 6, 2002. Musk committed $100 million of his personal fortune, more than half of everything he had made from PayPal. His first call was to Tom Mueller, a rocket engineer from TRW who had built the most powerful amateur rocket engine in history in his garage at home. Mueller was exactly the kind of person Musk was looking for: brilliant, unconventional, unbothered by what the establishment thought was possible. They built a team slowly and carefully, mostly young engineers who had grown up watching shuttle launches and dreaming of space. people who had joined Boeing or Lockheed and spent years frustrated by bureaucracy and slow progress. SpaceX offered them something those companies never could: the chance to actually build something. They worked in a converted warehouse in El Segundo, California. No corporate hierarchy, no committees, no approval chains stretching back through layers of management. Just engineers, tools, and a rocket taking shape on the floor. The rocket they were building was called Falcon 1, small by industry standards, designed to carry modest payloads into low Earth orbit. But the goal was never just to build a rocket. The goal was to prove it could be done at a fraction of the existing cost, and to prove that the aerospace establishment had been overcharging the world for 50 years. By 2005, they were ready to move to their launch site, Omelek Island. Population: SpaceX. Setting up a launch facility on a remote Pacific island was exactly as difficult as it sounds. Equipment had to be shipped thousands of miles. Engineers lived in temporary accommodation in extreme heat and humidity. There were no backup facilities, no nearby support infrastructure, no second chances if something went wrong with the equipment. And yet, the team built a functioning launch site from scratch in less than a year. On March 24, 2006, Falcon 1 stood on the launch pad for the first time. The atmosphere among the team was electric. Years of work, hundreds of thousands of engineering hours. One moment. The rocket ignited. For 25 seconds, everything worked perfectly. Then, a fuel leak caused a fire at the base of the engine. The engine shut down. The rocket, just 25 seconds into flight, fell back onto the launch pad and was destroyed. It was a devastating blow. But here is what separated SpaceX from any organization the aerospace industry had produced before. Within hours, Musk had gathered the team and turned the failure into a forensic exercise. What went wrong? Why it went wrong? What would be different next time? No blame, no panic, just analysis and forward motion. They began preparing for launch number 2 immediately. Launch number 2 came on March 21, 2007. This time, the rocket made it significantly higher. The first stage performed well. Then, a fuel slosh problem caused the second stage engine to shut down before reaching orbit. The rocket was lost. 2 launches, 2 failures, tens of millions of dollars, and 4 years of work had produced nothing that reached orbit. The aerospace establishment took notice, not with concern, but with satisfaction. Several prominent engineers gave interviews suggesting SpaceX had confirmed what they had always believed. Private companies could not build orbital rockets. This was precisely the moment where most companies would have quietly wound down. SpaceX accelerated. But accelerating cost money, and by 2008, the money was becoming a critical problem. The global financial crisis was the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression. Investment had frozen. Credit had dried up. Companies that had seemed invincible were disappearing overnight. Musk was simultaneously trying to save Tesla, his electric vehicle company, which was burning through cash and facing its own existential crisis. The Roadster was behind schedule. Costs were spiraling. Investors were nervous. Musk was attempting to manage 2 companies on the edge of failure at the same time. What the public didn't know was the true state of his personal finances. He had invested so heavily in both companies that by 2008 he was, by his own later admission, borrowing money from friends to cover basic living expenses. The man featured on magazine covers as a visionary billionaire could not comfortably pay his own bills. In a rare moment of public vulnerability, he said later that 2008 was the worst year of his life. His marriage had broken down, both companies were in crisis, his personal fortune was nearly gone, and his third rocket had just exploded. August 2, 2008. The Falcon 1 launched for the third time. This launch was the most agonizing of all because it came closest to succeeding. The first stage performed flawlessly. Stage separation occurred exactly on schedule. For a moment, it looked like it might actually work. Then a timing error caused the first and second stages to recontact during separation. The collision destroyed the rocket just minutes from achieving orbit. 3 launches, 3 failures. And this time, there was something different. This time, there was almost no money left. What happened inside SpaceX in the hours after the third failure is the emotional core of this entire story. The team was shattered. Engineers who had walked away from stable careers, who had spent years on a remote Pacific island, who had watched 3 years of their professional lives explode on a launch pad. Many of them genuinely believed it was over. Dolly Singh, SpaceX's head of talent at the time, described the atmosphere as one of profound grief. People were not angry. They were not looking for someone to blame. They were simply broken. And then Musk walked into the room. He did not give a corporate speech. He did not talk about investor expectations or company valuations. He told them what he believed. He told them that the mission was real, that the goal of making humanity multiplanetary was worth any cost, that the failures were not evidence of impossibility. They were the price of doing something that had never been done before. He told them he was not giving up, and he asked them not to give up either. People who were there described the next few minutes as transformative. One engineer said she had walked into that meeting certain it was a goodbye. She walked out ready to work through the night. They had 6 weeks to prepare the fourth and final rocket. 6 weeks, 1 rocket, everything on the line. While his team worked around the clock in the Pacific, Musk was simultaneously closing a desperate last-minute funding round for Tesla on the other side of the world. Flying between meetings, negotiating on the phone, signing documents in airport lounges. The night before the 4th SpaceX launch, he is reported to have not slept at all. September 28, 2008. The 4th Falcon 1 sat on the launch pad at Omelek Island. In the control room, the atmosphere was unlike anything the team had experienced before. No music, no celebration. Just silence, data screens, and the understanding that everything, the company, the mission, years of sacrifice, came down to the next few minutes. The engine ignited. The rocket lifted off. First stage burn nominal. 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds. Stage separation successful. Second stage ignition confirmed. 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. The rocket kept climbing. 5 minutes, 6 minutes. Nobody spoke. Everyone understood that at this altitude, at this velocity, the rocket was approaching the moment where the previous 3 had all died. 7 minutes, 8 minutes. Then the data confirmed what nobody dared say out loud. Falcon 1 had reached orbit. For the first time in history, a privately funded, liquid-fueled rocket had made it to space. The control room exploded. Engineers who had spent years in the desert and on remote islands, who had watched 3 rockets burn, who had worked through exhaustion and doubt and the quiet fear that it might never work, collapsed into each other. Some wept openly. Some stood completely still, unable to process it. One engineer later said it was the only time in his professional life he had been completely unable to speak. Musk, who had held himself together through 3 failures, through financial ruin, through the most difficult year of his life, broke down completely. "I had so much emotion," he said later. "It was just too much." But the story wasn't finished, because 3 weeks later, the phone rang. NASA had been watching, and what they had seen convinced them that SpaceX was something they needed. On December 23, 2008, 2 days before Christmas, NASA awarded SpaceX a commercial resupply services contract worth $1.6 billion to deliver cargo to the International Space Station. The company that had been weeks from bankruptcy, that had failed 3 times in public, that the aerospace establishment had dismissed as a fantasy, was now NASA's partner in human spaceflight. What came after is almost impossible to fully comprehend from the perspective of 2008. The Falcon 9 introduced something the industry had declared impractical for decades: a reusable first-stage booster that could land itself back on Earth after launch. The first time a Falcon 9 booster landed upright on a drone ship in the Atlantic Ocean, the entire aerospace industry stopped and stared. It was not supposed to be possible. SpaceX did it routinely within 2 years. In May 2020, SpaceX launched 2 NASA astronauts to the International Space Station aboard the Crew Dragon, the first crewed American launch from American soil since the Space Shuttle retired in 2011. Today, SpaceX is developing Starship, the most powerful rocket ever constructed, with the explicit goal of landing humans on Mars. The company Elon Musk founded in a warehouse in 2002 is now valued at over $200 billion. But the lessons of SpaceX are not about rockets or valuations. The first lesson: the experts are not always right. Every credible voice in the aerospace industry said it couldn't be done. They were measuring possibility against their own experience. Musk measured it against physics. The physics won. The second lesson: failure is data, not defeat. 3 catastrophic public failures would have ended any other company. SpaceX built a culture where failure was expected, analyzed, and used. The question was never whether something went wrong. The question was always what it told you about how to do it right. The third lesson: the distance between giving up and breaking through is often measured in weeks. SpaceX was 6 weeks from the end when it launched its 4th rocket. Tesla closed its funding round on Christmas Eve 2008, hours before it would have run out of money. The moments that define companies are almost always the moments when quitting seemed completely rational. In 2002, a man with no aerospace experience stood in a warehouse and told a small team of engineers that he wanted to make life multiplanetary. They believed him enough to try. They failed 3 times in public. They came within weeks of permanent extinction. And on a launch pad on a coral island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, on their last possible attempt, they changed the course of history. SpaceX did not succeed because the odds were favorable. It succeeded because the people inside it understood something most of the world does not: that the biggest achievements in history were not built in moments of comfort and certainty. They were built in the moments when failure was the most likely outcome, and someone decided to try anyway. Subscribe to Redwood Theory, because next week we tell a very different kind of story. A story about a man who convinced the entire world he was building the future of finance. A story about what happens when trust becomes the most dangerous currency of all. Next week, FTX.